This is the Sustainable IT Insights channel with Daoud, hosted on the Bright Talk Network. As a principal analyst at the advisory firm Compliance Standards LLC and host of the Trending Paths podcast, David brings you this new episode exploring the challenges of managing sustainable IT practices. Thank you for tuning in to this latest episode.
Hello everyone, I am Daoud of Compliance Standards with a compromised voice due to a flu, but a deadline is a deadline. I am thrilled to bring you a fascinating conversation with StarTech analyst Bob O'Donnell, who is President and Chief Analyst at TECHnalysis Research. In this episode, we dive deep into the evolving landscape of technology and the PC market in particular, from the rise of AI-powered PCs to the challenges of adapting to new architectures. Bob shares his expert insights on what's shaping the industry today and what we can expect in 2025. Bob and I explore the key trends and developments driving the tech world. We discuss the transformative role of neural processing units, or NPUs, in enhancing PC capabilities, the slow but steady adoption of AI-powered PCs, and obviously the opportunities and the challenges these bring to both enterprises and consumers. Bob also shares his perspective on how geopolitical tensions and regional differences impact supply chains and innovation, and we reflect on the opportunities for IT asset management and recycling as markets evolve. Whether you are an industry professional, an enthusiast, or simply curious about what's next in the world of technology, this episode offers a wealth of insights and predictions you won't want to miss.
Full disclaimer, I am in the Dominican Republic right now.
Oh, wow.
And I'm in a remote place that has very, iffy electricity supply.
Oh my gosh.
Very iffy internet supply. And I'm using, the most minimal infrastructure. I'm using an iPad 9th generation. I'm using
it
one
works.
of those phones.
You look fine.
We'll see what happens. It's an interesting place, by the way, Bob. To me, actually, the most important, perhaps, piece of information specific to DR is that they want to be a major player in this nearshoring semiconductor manufacturing.
Right.
They seem to be very serious about it, and we'll see. I mean, we have a new president. We'll see what's going to happen next.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So, we had a sim session, I remember, about exactly 12 months ago. What were sort of the key technology trends that we predicted, if you recall, back in late 2023, for 2024, if you recall, and which, in your mind, which predictions came true, and why do you think they materialized as you expected?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest trend for sure, when we think about the PC market in particular, was the rise of the AI PC, right? All the signs were there, all the chips we knew were coming. And, we saw the launch this year of, the Copilot Plus PCs. We didn't know the name back then, but, then we saw Intel come out not only with Meteor Lake, but then with Lunar Lake, their latest edition. AMD came out with a bunch of parts. So all of a sudden, everybody and their brother is thinking about AI PCs. And so I think that definitely came to pass. I will say, I think the initial sales have been a little slower than perhaps we might have thought. There have been some concerns. The first ones out the gate and that Microsoft were really keen on were the Qualcomm Snapdragon X-based products. And they have proven to be really pretty impressive in a lot of ways. The one challenge that some people are facing is that same old issue we've seen, which is ARM compatibility.
Yeah.
There are some applications, unfortunately, that just don't run on ARM from x86 days. It's not a huge issue. It's way better than the early editions of the Windows on ARM based PCs, but there's still a few little gotchas here and there. that have been a bit of a concern. And recently, there's been a big kerfuffle in the news because an Intel spokesperson talked about high return rates for these Qualcomm-based systems, and a lot of those are based on compatibility issues. Now, how bad they actually are, of course, Qualcomm immediately said no, that's not the case. But what I can say, it seems pretty clear, is that the initial sales of these devices have just been sort of so-so. They haven't really knocked it out of the park.
Yeah.
So that's been a little disappointing. But I think part of the reason for that, and one of the things that I don't think we necessarily predicted, but I will definitely predict for 2025, is people trying to figure out which architecture they go with. And it's not just an x86 versus ARM CPU discussion, although that continues to be part of it, but also the NPU. How important of a deal is the NPU? The NPU being the neural processing unit, the new addition to the PC architecture that we saw with the launch of AI PCs. And there's a lot of numbers. It's a classic PC game where everybody likes to throw out higher numbers, and it's measured in TOPS, tera operations per second. And Intel was technically first out the gate with a machine with a Meteor Lake that had 11 TOPS, but Microsoft said no, it doesn't count unless it's got at least 40 TOPS to be a Copilot Plus PC. And then that created a lot of confusion over what. So now both Intel, AMD, and Qualcomm all have chips that support more than 40 TOPS. But the problem is they're all different. And the question is, how do these all get supported? Because it gets a little messy when it comes to a software perspective. So I think one of the confusing points that I didn't predict is how much of a concern people would have about those different architectures. I think in 25, that's definitely going to continue to play itself out, but I think people will start to figure it out. And I also think we'll see important improvements in software development tools that will make it easier to just write an application that takes advantage of an NPU, and it doesn't matter which one it is. In the same way now, you have applications that take advantage of GPUs, and they don't really care if it's NVIDIA or Intel integrated graphics or AMD graphics. We're not there yet with NPUs, but I think, toward the end of 25 is when we'll start to see some of that.
Yeah, when it comes to these technologies and companies and brands that you mentioned, the Intel and Qualcomm, when you talk about GPU, CPU, clearly this is a discussion that enterprise folks understand, because they have to sort of adjust and adapt their IT infrastructure to these kinds of technologies. To what extent consumers are concerned, worried, debating this? Is it I guess what I'm trying to say is this an echo chamber within the industry that's sort of talking to each other?
That's a great question, David. And actually, right now it is. And that's been part of the problem. One of the interesting things the other thing about AI PC things that I think have shifted a bit is initially a lot of focus was on the consumer side. But in point of fact, we haven't seen as many compelling consumer applications for AI directly on the PC. And I'll get into that in just a second. We have, however, on the enterprise. So enterprise, to your point, is more aware of this, and consumer, it's been a little bit more challenging. And so, I mean, to be clear, everybody's excited about AI, and they're using things like ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot, but almost all of the services that they're using are still in the cloud. It doesn't matter if you have an NPU, or you could have an Android tablet or an iPad or a Mac or a PC. It doesn't matter at all because they're all cloud-based. The thing that's starting to happen is now we're seeing applications written to take advantage of the local chips. And that's where things get a little confusing, and exactly to your point. And consumers haven't figured this out yet. And frankly, most of the applications they're interested in are the ones that are still in the cloud, and it doesn't really matter. In 2025, we'll start to see more applications, including things like Microsoft Office, that will actually leverage the onboard chips to give you better performance with that kind of an NPU. That will start to make people go, oh, okay, I get it. And I think we'll start to see other kinds of applications as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I have Copilot pretty much installed by default in all of my PCs.
Exactly.
And my default AI is ChatGPT. I go to ChatGPT even though the Microsoft application is staring at me. It's inviting me, and a couple times I'm trying to solve a problem that is Microsoft specific, within a Microsoft application, and I go to Copilot and I ask, "How can you help me with this problem?" And the first response is, "Sorry, that's not my thing." And so I think
no, go ahead. Sorry.
I think there's a lot for them to figure out how to integrate in a way that is that is intuitive. Sorry, that is so simple for the user, and not to sort of pat the back of Apple, but do an Apple-like thing where it's easy and simple. I haven't seen the AI on Apple. I'm still using an iPhone XR, if you believe it. And it works perfectly fine. It works perfectly fine, and I have ChatGPT, which I use extensively.
Yeah.
So
well, and I was chuckling earlier only because the irony is that Copilot technically is based on ChatGPT. So in theory, you should be able to use Copilot, and yet you're not. Believe me, you are not the only person who has said this exact same kind of thing, right? You ironically go outside to ChatGPT to get the answer to the Microsoft problem that's based on ChatGPT that can't even answer its own question. So. Yeah. It just shows you we're early days.
We are.
But one thing that I think we will also see in 25 is I think we will start to see Windows get smarter. I mean, one of the things, it's still crazy to me that being able to find a file or an email or whatever based on a topic, not necessarily the word in the title, is always been a crazy, challenging thing. It shouldn't be, but it is. And the way our human brains think is we think sort of semantically. I know it was on, I had a chat with David, let me search for chat with David, and it'll find everything related to that, even though there's not a single file called chat with David or even an email that has that in the title. But there'll be stuff in there. And that semantic search is, in fact, one of the things that's going to start coming to PCs that will use the onboard NPU. And that's, as simple as that is, that's incredibly useful. And so we'll start to see some of those kinds of things, I think, start to happen. And that's when really we get to the point where I think it gets exciting, which is we make our devices smarter. Because as much compute power as all of these devices have, they're still really dumb. They don't understand the most basic of things in terms of how we think and how our brains think. And that's the whole beauty of what we expect with these AI PCs, is be able to say, hey, I'm trying to, build this table in Excel and it's not working. How do I do it? And it shows you, and it actually does it. That's the kind of stuff that I think people are going to be looking for, or create this image for me or what have you. And the beauty, again, of doing it on board is, in theory, I can do some of these things without sharing all my information on the web, because a lot of people are a little concerned with it, right? For obvious reasons, privacy reasons, security reasons.
Yeah.
So if I have a assistant on board that does all this work without going out to the web, and it just does its magic on my own data, then I'm going to feel safer and better about that. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, not at all. So what do you make of the sort of the regional differences in terms of where at least the AI on the PC side stands? You look at on one hand Dell and HP that are sort of US centric. They're global, but their market is primarily the US and Western Europe. They haven't done very well there. You look at the Asians, Lenovo and Asus. They're swearing that they're claiming that AI PC is booming, and it is booming. So the question is it that the Asian consumer gets it more than or is ready for it, or is it the fact that perhaps Lenovo and Asus decided 50% of our systems are going to go, 30% or 20% are going to be AI PCs, and we're going to sell them no matter what, and we're going to claim that hey, we're better than you guys.
It's an interesting question. I think there's a little bit of truth to both sides of that, to be honest with you. I do think Dell and HP, as well as Lenovo and Asus and Acer and Microsoft and even Samsung, they're just going to make AI part of the system. In the same way, it's impossible to buy a PC today that doesn't have a GPU. It may be an integrated GPU, but there's a GPU in every single PC sold. There's going to be an NPU pretty quickly in every single PC sold, such that it becomes a non-issue to say an AI PC. That would be saying like, I'm buying a GPU PC. Yeah, like nobody says that, right? And nobody's going to say I have an AI PC. Right now, it is a question of positioning and messaging. From what I have heard, the actual sales of the AI PCs, whether it be from Lenovo or Acer, aren't necessarily that much better than what we're seeing from the other guys. But, again, a lot of it is about how it's being positioned and what have you. And again, I think you're going to see some of those companies adopt, that being Lenovo and Acer and Asus, adopting some of these technologies a little bit more quickly, as they tend to do, generally speaking, when new technologies come out. But they're also the companies that try kind of one of everything. They throw a bunch on the wall and see what sticks. Exactly. And not everything does. So there is also that to be aware of. I think you're going to see a lot of this. I think, to your question, I mean, one of the interesting regional questions is going to be, and this is more of a China specific issue, but, what tools are you going to be allowed to access? Because there's going to be different LLMs and different tools in China than you're going to get in the Western world. And that's going to have a huge impact. And there's a sense that China could end up falling behind because they don't have access to the most advanced chips to build these models in the first place. And that in turn is going to mean that consumers get access to models that aren't as advanced as they would get in the Western world. That is going to be a very interesting question to watch over the next couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a final point on sort of the AI device side. I know that Dell has been absolutely super happy with the server side.
Yes.
They've been selling tons of those to what they call second tier cloud providers, not the big hyperscale guys. But I think these are probably what we've known as your classic, servers. They're not really part of a big enterprise thing, but that's been booming for them, and that goes back to sort of the initial discussion that it's an enterprise-driven sector, at least in 2024, before it moves to the consumer side.
I agree, and one other point I'll make about that actually a lot of people haven't caught on to yet, but I think is going to be a big deal is I think you're going to see, and we've seen Dell push this, we've seen Lenovo push this, even Cisco is doing a little bit of this. They are selling NVIDIA GPU equipped servers to the enterprise because it turns out some of these enterprises want to do their own work on these AI foundation models. They may not build they're not going to compete with a ChatGPT or a Meta Llama, but there are several of these big models right now, Meta Llama in particular, and it's rumored that Google may do this with Gemini, but there's Claude from Anthropic. A number of these can be actually brought into an enterprise and then fine-tuned with your own data, and then you can run those models within your enterprise. So a new opportunity I think we'll see in 2025 is regular businesses actually kind of rebuilding up their data centers specifically to do AI. So, it's that classic pendulum that we've seen for the last 20 plus years in the PC and compute business, where you've got things that are, behind the firewall, then they're, out in the public, and then they're behind the fire. I mean, it's a classic pendulum, and there's a little bit of that swinging back. I mean, don't get me wrong. People are still doing a lot in the cloud, and that's going to continue. But I think you are going to see some of these things start to change.
And then for the folks that I track on the IT and on the recycling side, the ITAD sector, this is going to be also an incredible opportunity because the moment you talk about doing your transactions on a device, you're automatically now talking about much bigger hard drives. I think the other thing that Microsoft has been sort of pushing is the archiving technology that it has, which means it enables you to sort of go back historically and find something that you thought you deleted, right?
Yes.
that in itself is going, one of the biggest growth segment in the ITAD is the data security aspect of it, is
Right.
Data erasure and
Yep.
dealing with during the decommissioning of data centers, but also the PCs. And I think they're going to find that as a new opportunity as these AI PCs become more more generalized. You're gonna have what you thought you removed in terms of security risk on the cloud now is migrating down to your system. And as an enterprise IT management, you need to figure out how to secure those devices.
No, it's absolutely true. And here's the other, to me, one of the biggest impacts for ITAD is going to be the fact that, there's three super cycles, as it were, happening simultaneously in the PC business that I think are going to generate a big refresh. Number one, we just have the plain old fact that we are 4.5 years sort of out since the start of the pandemic when a ton of PCs were purchased. So they're nearing end of normal physical life anyway. That's number one. Number
Right.
two, we have Windows 10 end of support coming in, I think it's like October of 2025. That will also trigger a big refresh. And then finally, number three, you have the whole onslaught of AI PCs. So even if I'm an IT manager that says, I'm not totally bought in on this AI PC thing yet, but if I have to replace hardware anyway, and I've got to deal with a Windows 11 upgrade, why the heck would I not get an AI PC? So
absolutely,
you put all three of those together, and it becomes a huge opportunity, I think, for ITAD, because there's going to be a lot of PCs that are going to be decommissioned or, resold. Of course, the other big thing, and I know you know this, but when you've got companies like France who are now demanding a certain percentage of PCs be recommissioned PCs, like you can't just sell all new PCs in France anymore. A certain percentage have to be recommissioned. If other countries pick that up, oh my gosh, that's an explosion of opportunity for the ITAD market, because well, they may not dispose of, maybe not ITAD, the ITA market, but use IT assets, because people are going to want to recommission some of these things. But yeah, I mean, those I think are going to be huge opportunities moving forward.
This is sort of the part of the ESG mandates. Although ESG in the US is coming under heavy attacks by companies that fear political backlash,
right?
In doing so. But it's becoming inevitable. I mean, if you want to do business in Europe, you have to abide by a number of rules, and some of these rules are ESG driven. Some of these rules are data security driven. So it's going to be interesting. You mentioned earlier, Bob, China. Looking back at this year, 2024, how did global events such as supply chain disruptions or geopolitical events have impacted sort of the tech landscape from your perspective?
Well, I mean, I feel like 24 actually was a year of a little bit of normalization. I mean, we're, the ripples from the pandemic, I think, continued a lot longer than people realized. And so it feels like in 24 in general, like pretty much everybody could get what they needed, it felt like. And so I feel like some of that has become a little bit better. But, the geopolitical tensions, on the other hand, which have nothing to do necessarily with the realities of supply chain, seem much more challenging. And that's, of course, going to be the biggest question for 25 is what happens there. Between, the new president in the US and then rising tensions in China and questions about Taiwan. And, there's a lot of potential for, I mean, God forbid anything happens with Taiwan. I mean, talk about supply chain disruptions. It'll be like we've never, ever seen before. That's kind of the big question. But I don't know. It seems to me from my perspective, in general, for the most part, 24 sort of helped smooth out the last few ripples in terms of overall
Yeah.
supply chain. And again, there weren't these kind of crazy shortages that we've seen.
Yeah, the interesting thing, Bob, now that I come to think about it, really, I think with the exception of a major disruption in Taiwan, I think the past year has shown how strong sort of the global supply chain system is. We have two major wars. We have one in Ukraine, one in the Middle East. We have so many disruptions all over the world, and yet none of that has impacted, business or whatever. I mean, there's certainly inflation, which is an economic discussion more than a geopolitical discussion.
Right.
But geopolitically speaking, I think businesses have probably prepared themselves for global disruptions minus China or minus Taiwan, which if that happens, it could be a problem. But I know that with the CHIP Act, and I know that the federal government has been sort of looking at neighboring countries to do this so-called nearshoring for things like semiconductors. But to your point, I think 24 was for a year that was full of geopolitical tensions. It's been business as usual, and if I look at sort of the market valuations of most companies, most of them seem to be doing very well, generating good profits, with the exception of Intel. But that's an Intel specific problem.
Yes.
What happened to Intel, Bob?
Oh man, look, it's such a difficult situation. I mean, look, the issue is there was a recognition a few years back. Well, let me take it even a step further. Intel, when you and I worked together, Intel was an immovable mountain. Like they were just the absolute rock of everything and innovation and everything else. And, they were on the cutting edge of semiconductor manufacturing and everything, and they pretty much ruled the computing world. And, who knows how or why, but they took their eye off the prize in terms of the manufacturing, and then they let that slip. And it apparently slipped worse than most of us seem to realize. And so then, they're trying to play catch up. And then also the way the business was constructed between the fab and the design house, it was more interleaved and more monetarily dependent upon each other than perhaps, again, a lot of people realized. So there was this recognition, oh crap, we've got to fix this. They brought in Gelsinger, who I still think was the right person to do it. And the problem was, it was going to be a multi-year fix. Nothing was going to change it overnight. Nobody on the street wants to hear, like, if it takes more than a few months, that's all they're willing to put up with. And so at a certain point, I think, there was external pressures, even though they seem to be making excellent progress on a plan that certainly looked impressive, the 5 nodes in 4 years. I mean, they seem to be doing that. To regain themselves as a manufacturing leader, and then separately to bring in additional clients to their fabs. I think those are all the right things, and they still are the right things. They're just going to take a while, and unfortunately, I think Gelsinger got kind of hung out to dry on that one. Arguably, I've heard stories that there were a lot of too many pet projects that weren't being killed off and too many distractions that theoretically could have been cleaned up a little bit easier, and so it's easy to find, things after the fact. But, obviously they're in a situation that they've never been in, and it's going to take a while to dig out. I mean, they're still a great company. They still do amazing stuff. And as I've argued, while Intel may not be too big to fail, they're too important to fail. And I think the U.S. government recognizes that, because we have to have, I mean, it's bad enough the way it is with, our dependence on Taiwan. If Intel goes away, it's that much worse. So we've got to keep that piece going somehow, some way, even if it means government subsidies. I mean, let's not forget, we don't like to think about that in the U.S., but every other country in the world does that. We're unique in not really doing that. So, there must be something to it. So
Yeah. So on the practical side of this story, Bob, and I'm going to focus on the PC space because granted, it's a portion of the tech world, but it's one that we're all exposed to because we use computers every day. What are the implications of a weak Intel on the folks that are producing, the OEMs that are manufacturing these things? I know that at some point we know that Intel was 70, 80, more than 85% of the market at some point, and to the point that my ex-boss, who he replaced, I will not cite his name, told me one time that he had the feeling that AMD was created to sort of put away the eyes and ears of regulators in terms of looking at Intel as a monopoly, and the cost of this is 15-20% market share, something like that. True or not, I'm just reporting. If that behemoth gets a hit and takes a while to recover, what do Dell and what's Michael Dell and the CEO of HP and the PC ecosystem thinking? Do they have to go now to what? NVIDIA, I suppose, to AMD, I suppose?
Well, I mean, look, here's the thing. I mean, you got to give a lot of credit. I mean, it's a funny story about AMD, but look, the reality is they've been around as a competitor for a while. Lisa Su has been an amazing CEO. She's turned that place around in a way that's very impressive. And now they are a major player. And we have seen them, continue to gain share. First of all, they gained a ton of share in the server market when the Epic stuff came out. And by the way, for those with historical reference, remember that AMD had huge server share with a chip that was codenamed Barcelona, 15, 20 years ago. They came out and walloped Intel, and that was a kick in the butt to Intel. And then Intel kind of got their act together and regained some of that share back. But it's not like AMD hasn't had big share in other places. And so what we're seeing now is AMD, and this is regardless of Intel, was gaining share anyway. They were gaining share in servers, and they've been gaining share in PCs. And of course, they're even gaining share against NVIDIA on the GPU side. I mean, AMD is kind of an interesting bird in that they have all the pieces of the puzzle, and they're just not as well recognized for that. So I think obviously we will see other companies like the Dells, HPs, whatever of the world, shift some more business to AMD. Logically, it just makes sense, right? And AMD can handle it. I mean, they use TSMC as their fab, but they have the designs, they have the capability, they have some pretty impressive new silicon that's coming out. Their latest PC chips, have technically the fastest NPU of anybody, some of the fastest integrated graphics of anybody, and solid CPU performance. So they have a very competitive offering out there. So I think that logically is going to lead them down that road. There's all kinds of rumors of NVIDIA getting into the PC business and with more than just graphics at CES. That's the rumor. So that's going to certainly shift things around a bit. So, I mean, nature abhors a vacuum, as it were, right? So something will come and fill in where Intel loses some ground. But I also think, Intel is going to get their act together. I have faith that they will. It's going to be a difficult year, but I think they have, Panther Lake is their next big chip. It's based on 18A, which is the, kind of the big goal they had. Supposedly they're on track to get that chip out later this year, and that will put them back in the ball game, I think. So, I mean, look, the good news is it's incredibly competitive. And oh, by the way, Qualcomm's still around too. So now, we went from, we're going to go from having 2 real competitors to 4 likely, which is crazy. Now, is that sustainable? I don't know. But it's certainly going to create way more competition, which is going to mean better and better products and better prices when you have that. I mean, that's the beauty of competition, is you're going to get more advances, more companies, working harder to beat the other one. And in the long run, that's going to be a big win, I think, for everybody.
Yeah, and among these companies, Bob, or maybe this is sort of parallel to this discussion. When you think of all these micro, super mobile devices, little toys, little things like that that require chips, who among these companies make that, or is it a completely separate, completely different market?
Well, I will say ARM is, a huge player there, right? Most
Yeah,
of the smaller devices, people forget 99.5% of all mobile phones are based on an ARM core, right? So Apple uses an ARM core, Qualcomm uses ARM cores, everybody uses ARM cores, MediaTek uses ARM cores. So
yeah,
ARM doesn't make chips. They just create the intellectual property that other companies then turn into their own chips. But ARM's behind that. Um, you've got RISC-V is on the low end, is an open source kind of an opportunity for people to build these microcontrollers. Good old MIPS, remember them? They're still banging
yeah.
away. Again, on the lower end. So you've got and there's a whole ton of companies that will take this IP and put pieces together. Um,
Right.
and that's happening in the automotive space. That's happening
That's
in
great.
manufacturing. It's happening in smart home. So you've got a lot of different sort of core technologies out there, a whole bunch of little companies that can license this technology and then do some of their own secret sauce on top of it, or frankly, take it as it is and just market it to a specific target audience with the right software. So it's a very robust set of um, compute capabilities that's going to be in everything that we have. Everything from coffee makers to,
Yeah,
toys to.
absolutely. And layer on top of this AI, I think I wonder to what extent the big semiconductor companies or chip companies would be interested in playing a bigger role in this
Well,
because it's going to go.
they are. Look, they're all. Everybody has. Some of these devices use FPGAs, and both AMD and Intel have an FPGA business. You've got also smaller independent little FPGA companies, people like Lattice Semiconductor, as well. Um, there's all kinds of companies out there doing these kinds of devices. And, I think you're going to continue to see that. And then you have the bigger guys like the Broadcoms and the Marvells that also they're helping build chips for other people.
Hmm.
There was a recent story about how Broadcom is apparently helping Apple build a server chip. Again, leveraging ARM cores to help with a new server CPU design. So
Yeah, yeah.
lots of stuff going
Interesting.
on.
Interesting for sure. Now, going back very quickly to your comment on Intel being able to make it back, absolutely, I 100% agree with you. I think letting Intel slide down is not going to be a solution for this country, for this country's technology, for any country's technology. I mean, they have such a
No,
such
they're a
intellectual.
worldwide presence, and
That's right. And AMD, absolutely fantastic company, and I agree with you. Lisa Su has been doing very fantastic job. I think the problem that they have is what I experienced years ago when I bought my first car. It used to be a Hyundai, and I told the mechanic back then because it had so many problems. Will it be a BMW in 20, 30 years? He said no. He said the brand is a problem. When you start branding yourself as sort of the second or the third, it's very difficult to go from the second to the first. And
right.
that's I think that's a branding problem that perhaps AMD has. Perhaps I'm not a
I
marketing
mean,
expert.
I would argue they initially did have that. I think they've overcome a lot of that,
Oh,
given
okay.
that they're able to compete. Again, they're competing with Nvidia for GPUs at the highest end of the AI infrastructure market. They're competing very directly with Intel and Qualcomm on the PC side, and I don't know. We'll see. It's and then on the with Intel on the server side as well. So I feel like there certainly is some overhang of them being kind of the cheaper version. Uh, but I think they've done a lot of work on just improving their design capabilities overall. And that's helping them. But those are, those things don't happen overnight. You know,
No, absolutely.
brand
Absolutely.
concepts and things take a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. Generations, in fact. The problem that Intel is facing, does that translate into lower shipment, or call it not lower shipment, but a reduction in market share, perhaps?
Well,
Does
there's
that
going to be
mean,
a confident. I mean, I certainly think it's possible. I mean, again, they've been losing share in the server market sort of naturally anyway, unfortunately.
yeah,
So that would theoretically continue. ARM has been eating away. You've seen ARM-based servers kind of finally being taken as a serious opportunity. You see custom ARM chips from the Amazons of the world and others, within the cloud, and Google's doing that, so is Microsoft. So, I mean, there are a lot of competitive forces at play here,
right.
that are going to continue to be at play. And again, regardless of Intel's situation, would have been an issue. But with the issue, yeah, I mean, I think people might start to lean until they start to see Intel, come around. Again, Intel has earned the benefit of the doubt being around for 50 years. Like,
Yeah,
there's some heritage there. And they've had some tough times in the past, probably not quite as tough as what we're seeing now, but they have been through some tough rows and they've made it through. And so I think the presumption is that they will again. But in the short term, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. It has to go through whatever path it has to. I think what my expectation is probably they're going to spend a lot less money on their marketing program, the Intel Inside, the so-called Intel Inside,
Exactly.
which really was partly what sort of created a roadblock for AMD, because
Yes.
Intel had the financial wherewithal and the money to pay for those marketing campaigns that AMD didn't. And if that's neutralized or reduced, I think that's going to be an interesting opening for AMD to.
I agree. I think that's absolutely true. Yeah.
Predictions. Third quarter was down. IDC called it, I think, 1.5. Gartner 2.5, something like that. Let's say between 1.5 and 3%, year on year. That figure, obviously, we know is not does not represent sales. It represents shipment. The most part of it is the channels,
yeah.
Which means sales could have been even worse. If the inventory piles up within the Best Buys of the world, then you've got a problem. When you look at everything that you've been talking about, Bob, do you see sort of a recipe for a consumer rebound? Of course, enterprise is progressive. It's going through very intelligent sort of cycle where you have a number of factors helping through the transition. Predictability is there. Consumer is a lot less predictable. If you take all of that on the consumer side, what's your mind telling you, assuming inflation gets better? Because I tell you, we talk about technology, but if inflation is not under control, we're going nowhere. You can have
and if we see some of these tariffs really hit, that's going to be a huge problem too.
That's right.
But look, I mean, I think the issue is the case for AI PCs for consumers has not been made yet. So when the case is made for consumers, a compelling case for why they need an AI PC, we'll start to see that shift. And I think it's going to take, there's no one killer application. It's going to take several different things. But I think we will start to see some of those things show up in 25. I think the PC market, as a result, will start to look a little better in 25. I think we'll see some exciting new capabilities, from, both the combination of the new AI software as well as this new hardware. And it's going to all of a sudden create new things that we hadn't thought of before. And then all of a sudden, I think you're going to see like, oh, wow, this is actually really cool. And, all of a sudden my old non-NPU equipped non-AI PC is going to feel a little long in the tooth. And I'm going to want to upgrade because there's going to be certain things that I can only do with these new machines. We're not there yet because, like you said, right now, the cool things I want to do, I can just do on the cloud. But I think that's going to change.
Yeah. So, I am generally with you. I'm still hesitant to think that they will create new interesting use models that quickly, Bob. It's probably going to take a little longer than that. I don't think it can't be just software specific, like
No, I agree.
open
No,
Adobe, and
but
it has to be the moment you press that power button, something happens that's magical that would make what I'm using right now completely useless.
no,
And I'm not sure.
Completely agree. Look, and the other thing, David, is the hardware always is in front of the software, right? That's always been the case. You have to get the hardware out there and give it, a couple of generations of software developers figuring out how to use the NPUs. And as I said, right now we have the challenge I mentioned briefly, just, every single NPU architecture is different. So right now that means if I want to write an application that runs on an Intel NPU, I have to change it and tweak it to run on an AMD NPU and change it and tweak it to run on a Qualcomm NPU. Well, that's not sustainable, obviously. So again, we're waiting on some development tools that make that process easier. So once we start to see that in turn, along with, a couple of generations of hardware out there, then you start to turn the corner. It's a fair question. You're more than fair to question that on the consumer side. I think it will happen that quickly on the enterprise side. I really do.
Yes.
And I think there's some very practical things like meeting summarizations and email stuff and document creation, like stuff that really, like all of a sudden I can do things, in 2 hours that used to take me 6 hours. That is a real meaningful benefit.
Absolutely.
And that kind of stuff will happen.
What happens to technology refresh on the hardware side once you have your first fleet of AI PCs on the hardware side? My argument, Bob, and feel free to destroy it, when I meet with ITAD clients, is to tell them that what you're used to having a 3, 4, 5 year refresh cycle on a hardware side, it could happen a little faster when you have your first set of AI PCs hitting the market, because especially among the people that are power users that want the greatest and the latest, they really would want, a new refresh cycle quickly.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's a small percentage of the market, but we will see faster refreshes because all of a sudden the quality of the NPUs are going to go up dramatically, right? We went from 11 tops to 40 something tops, and now we're in the 50s. Rumors are, of 100 tops coming out next year and more. So I think there's going to be a bit of a faster turn cycle for a while. And then things will start to slow down. But it's kind of like the early days of graphics when you had graphics and there were certain things you could do. I think, we'd have to go back and look historically because that was a long time ago when it was really first integrated. But my guess is the churn was a little faster then too. And I think you're right. I think there's some validity to it. It's not for everybody.
Sure.
That will make a difference.
Now, on the opposite side, is it possible that after a while, 3, 4, 5 years after the AI
lifetimes get longer,
matures,
yes.
Will we be at that stage where I'm using my iPhone XR and I'm not getting rid of it anytime soon?
I mean, look, that's always a possibility. I think there's some physicality because of we're moving so much to notebooks, and notebooks get dropped and carried and used. And I mean, there's just a physical side of things that are going to change, that aren't going to change. And some of the same physical things that get people to upgrade their current laptops are going to continue to be the case. So we'll see. Going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, I think it has to be sort of a healthy middle ground or middle way where basically on the one hand, ITAM, IT asset management folks, enterprise users are happy to stabilize their IT infrastructure for as long as they can.
Yes. While
ensuring that AI updates and upgrades are actually improving their performance and their productivity. And also fast enough for the industry, whether it's on a front end, sort of the brand new PC guys, or the back end recyclers, that they're actually keeping their facilities busy.
Yeah, I think
it's middle ground.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's going to be, initially we're going to see it ramp up to a faster pace, and then it's going to slow back down. And the question is, where does it slow to an even longer pace than it is now, or to about the same? That's I guess the big question.
And thank you so much, Bob. Appreciate your time, and we look forward to doing a postmortem soon.
Thanks, David. Always great to chat. Always great
Pleasure.
to chat.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks a lot for your time. All right.
All righty. We'll see you.
Take care.
You just listened to an episode of the Sustainable IT Insights channel. Please subscribe to this channel. More information can be obtained here and on our podcast website at trendingpaths.com. Until our next talk, thank you and goodbye.